Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old wooden crate sat in the corner of the attic, a silent keeper of things I'd long since packed away, not just physically, but emotionally too. It had been there since Richard passed, 5 years now. Funny how time can both crawl and fly. One minute you're counting the seconds, the next, years have slipped through your fingers like fine sand. I hadn't planned on going up there, not really. But the rain had been drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof all morning, a mournful tune that seemed to seep into my bones, making the house feel too quiet, too empty. My daughter, Sarah, had called, her voice bright and breezy from her sunny California life, full of talk about the kids and her latest work project. It was good to hear, of course, but it always left a little ache, a reminder of the bustling life this house once held. So, the attic. Maybe I was looking for a distraction, or maybe something deeper, a thread to pull that might lead me somewhere other than the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking grandfather clock in the hall. The crate was marked Linville Creek Memories. Linville Creek. Just the name brought a faint scent of pine needles and damp earth, the whisper of wind through tall trees. It was a small arts community nestled in the mountains where I'd spent a formative summer, decades ago, long before Richard, long before Sarah, when I was just Amanda, a girl with a sketchbook and a heart full of hopeful dreams. My fingers, a little stiff these days, fumbled with the rusted latch. Inside, nestled amongst faded tapestries and a chipped pottery mug, was a worn leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with my youthful scrawl, earnest observations about light and shadow, heartfelt, if somewhat clumsy, poetry, and sketches. So many sketches. And then I saw it. A small, almost forgotten watercolor of the old Linville Creek mill, its stone walls covered in ivy, the water wheel still and patient. Tucked behind it was a photograph, slightly faded, of a group of us, smiling, squinting into the sun. I recognized a younger, wilder version of myself, and there, on the edge of the group, a quiet young man with kind eyes and a shy smile. James Abbott. He'd been an apprentice to Silas, the town's renowned woodcarver. I hadn't thought of him in years. A peculiar feeling stirred in my chest, a mix of nostalgia and something else, something like a gentle nudge. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and a watery sun was trying to break through the clouds. Linville Creek, why not? I had no pressing engagements. Sarah was busy. The garden was mostly managing itself for a few days. The thought, once it took root, blossomed with surprising speed. It felt a little reckless, a little unlike the sensible Amanda I had become. But then again, perhaps that sensible Amanda was precisely the person who needed a little shaking up. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was online, booking a room at the old Linville Creek Inn, the only one still operating from what I could gather. It still looked the same in the pictures, all rustic charm and welcoming porches. My car was gassed up. I could pack a small bag. Just a few days, I told myself. A trip down memory lane. What could be more harmless than that? The drive up the next morning was beautiful. The air grew cooler, cleaner, as the highway gave way to winding mountain roads. The trees were already hinting at autumn, their leaves tinged with gold and crimson, a stark contrast to the perpetual green of my suburban neighborhood. I felt a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't just the change of scenery. It was the anticipation, the sense of stepping outside the well-worn tracks of my daily life. Linville Creek, when I finally rolled into its small main street, was both familiar and changed. The old hardware store was now an art gallery showcasing gleaming, abstract sculptures. The bakery where we used to buy warm bread each morning was a chic little cafe with artisanal coffees and gluten-free pastries. But the bones of the place were the same. The sturdy stone buildings, the rushing sound of the creek that gave the town its name, the towering presence of the mountains that cupped it like a protective hand. The inn was just as I remembered, perhaps a little more weathered, but its charm was intact. My room overlooked the creek, and I left the window open, letting the sound of the water and a scent of pine fill the space. After settling in, I took a walk. My old haunts called to me. The little bridge where I'd spent hours sketching, the path that led up to Silas's old workshop. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find. Ghosts of my younger self, perhaps. Or maybe just a sense of peace. The path to Silas's workshop was more overgrown than I remembered. Silas himself had passed on many years ago, I knew that. His intricate carvings of forest creatures and wizened old men had been legendary. I wondered what had become of his tools, his unfinished pieces. As I neared the clearing where the workshop stood, I heard it, the rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of a mallet on wood. My heart gave a little flutter. Surely not. The workshop looked much the same, a sturdy log cabin with a wide porch. And there, on the porch, his back to me, was a man, his silvered hair catching the afternoon sun, his shoulders broad, his hands moving with a familiar grace over a piece of wood. He turned, perhaps sensing my presence, or maybe just stretching. The mallet stilled. His eyes, a clear, thoughtful blue, met mine. They were older, framed by lines that spoke of time and experience, but they were unmistakably the same kind eyes I remembered from that old photograph. James. It was James Abbott. He looked at me, a flicker of puzzlement, then a slow dawning of recognition. A smile, no longer shy but warm and welcoming, spread across his face. "Amanda," he said, his voice a little rougher, deeper than I remembered. "Amanda Holloway? Is that really you?" It was the way he said my name, as if plucking it from a distant, cherished memory, that made the years fall away. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Hello, James," I said. "It's been a long time." The air filled with the scent of freshly cut cedar and the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke from his chimney. This wasn't just a trip down memory lane anymore. It felt like the beginning of something new, something unexpected, something that made the quiet hum in my own life suddenly seem very far away. We talked for hours that first afternoon, sitting on the porch of what was now clearly his workshop. He'd taken over from Silas, he explained, after apprenticing with him for many years, eventually inheriting the tools, the space, and the legacy. His own work was different from Silas's, less about mythical creatures and more about the natural forms of the wood itself, coaxing out its inherent beauty. He showed me a piece he was working on, a smooth, flowing sculpture that suggested a river current or the sweep of wind. It was beautiful, imbued with a quiet strength. I told him about my life, about Richard, about Sarah and my grandchildren, about the quiet routine I'd settled into. He listened patiently, his gaze attentive, making me feel as though my ordinary story was something worth hearing. He spoke of his own life, too, a life lived largely in Linville Creek, dedicated to his craft. He'd never married, he said, a faint wistfulness in his tone, but no regret. His work, the forest, the creek, these were his companions. There was no awkwardness between us, surprisingly. It felt like picking up a conversation that had been paused, not one that had ended decades ago. We laughed about some of the antics of that long-ago summer, the earnest intensity of our youthful artistic ambitions. He remembered my sketches, even specific ones I'd long forgotten. "You had a real eye for light," he said, and the simple compliment warmed me more than I could say. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me about that part of myself, the artist I'd once dreamed of being. As the sun began to dip below the mountain peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he walked me back towards the inn. The air was crisp, and the stars were beginning to prick the darkening sky. "It was good to see you, Amanda," he said, as we reached the inn's welcoming glow. "Really good." "You too, James," I replied, meaning it more than I could express. That night I lay in bed, the sound of the creek a soothing lullaby, but my mind was alive, replaying our conversation, the easy camaraderie, the unexpected sense of connection. It wasn't just nostalgia I was feeling. It was something more, a sense of awakening, as if a dormant part of me had been gently nudged back to life. The next few days fell into a gentle rhythm. I'd explore Linville Creek in the mornings, revisiting old spots, discovering new ones. The town had changed, yes, but its essence remained. There was a vibrancy to the small community, a collective appreciation for art and nature that was infectious. I found a little bookstore tucked away on a side street, filled with the comforting scent of old paper and brewing tea, and spent a happy hour browse its shelves. I even bought a small sketchbook and some charcoal pencils, the feel of them in my hand surprisingly familiar, like greeting an old friend. In the afternoons, I'd find myself drawn back to James's workshop. Sometimes I'd just sit on the porch, reading or sketching. While he worked, the only sounds the tap-tap of his mallet, the whisper of his tools against the wood, and the murmur of the forest. Other times we'd talk. Not constantly, not filling every silence, but easily, comfortably. He told me about the different types of wood he used, their grains, their scents, their stories. He showed me how to hold a chisel properly, how to feel the way the wood wanted to yield. He asked about my life since that long-ago summer, not just the broad strokes, but the small details, the textures of my days. He didn't pry, but he had a way of asking questions that made me want to share. I told him about my little garden, my struggles with a particularly stubborn rose bush, my attempts at making sourdough bread during the lockdown, most of which ended up as offerings to the birds. He listened, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners when I said something funny, his expression thoughtful when I touched on more serious matters. I learned about his quiet life too, his solitary walks in the mountains, his passion for observing the wildlife, the satisfaction he found in creating something beautiful and lasting with his hands. There was a peacefulness about him, a centeredness that I found myself envying a little, then simply appreciating. He seemed so at home in his own skin, in his own life. One afternoon, I found him struggling with a large, intricately carved panel. He was preparing for a commission. It was a depiction of the Linville Creek Valley, incredibly detailed, and he needed to move it to a different stand to get better light on one section. "Here, let me help," I offered, putting down my sketchbook. He hesitated for a moment. "It's heavy, Amanda." "I'm stronger than I look," I said with a smile. And it was true. Years of gardening and wrestling with grandchildren had kept me reasonably fit. Together, we carefully lifted the heavy panel. My hands brushed his as we maneuvered it, a brief, accidental contact, but it sent a little jolt through me, a spark of warmth that was surprisingly potent. We positioned the panel, and he stepped back to look at it, a satisfied smile on his face. "Thanks," he said. "I couldn't have managed that on my own just now." "Teamwork," I replied, feeling a pleasant sense of accomplishment. It was a small thing, helping him move that panel, but it felt significant, a tiny act of partnership that resonated deeper than the action itself. He started showing me his finished pieces, not just the ones in the workshop, but pieces he'd installed around the small community. A bench by the creek, intricately carved with images of river otters and kingfishers, a magnificent eagle, wings outstretched, that graced the entrance to the local school. Seeing his work in its intended environment, integrated into the life of the town, gave me a new appreciation for his artistry and his dedication. He wasn't just a craftsman, he was a storyteller, his narratives etched in wood. He talked about the responsibility he felt, carrying on Silas's legacy, but also finding his own voice. Silas taught me the techniques, he said, his gaze distant for a moment, but he always told me, "The wood will tell you what it wants to be, James. You just have to learn to listen." I thought about my own life, the paths I'd taken, the ones I hadn't. Had I been listening to what my own life wanted to be? Or had I been too busy following the map I thought I was supposed to follow? The subtle tension I'd felt initially, that slight awareness of him as a man, hadn't exactly disappeared, but it had transformed. It was less about any kind of romantic expectation. We were both well past the blush of youth, and our lives had taken such different courses, and more about a profound emotional resonance, a sense of being truly seen and understood. There was a deep respect growing between us, an appreciation for the lives we had lived, the people we had become. He respected my past, my marriage to Richard, my role as a mother and grandmother. And I respected his choices, his solitary dedication to his art, his deep connection to this place. It was in this space of mutual respect that a new kind of intimacy began to bloom, an intimacy of shared thoughts and quiet companionship. It wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but something gentler, more profound, like the steady warmth of embers rather than a blazing fire. And it was, in its own way, just as powerful. One crisp evening, as the autumn chill began to bite a little deeper, James invited me to his small cottage, tucked away behind the workshop, for dinner. "Nothing fancy," he'd said with his characteristic modesty. "Just some stew I made." The cottage was as unpretentious and welcoming as he was. Books lined the shelves, interspersed with small, beautiful pieces of carved wood, a bird in flight, a curled-up fox, a perfect, smooth stone he'd found and polished. A fire crackled in the small stone hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow over the room. The aroma of the stew, rich with herbs and slow-cooked meat, filled the air. We ate at a simple wooden table he'd clearly made himself, its surface worn smooth with use. The conversation flowed as easily as it always did between us now, ranging from books we'd read to the changing seasons, to funny anecdotes about the sometimes eccentric residents of Linville Creek. After dinner, as we sat by the fire, nursing mugs of herbal tea, a comfortable silence settled between us. It wasn't an empty silence, but one filled with unspoken understanding. He looked at me then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "You know, Amanda," he said softly, "Silas always used to say that people come into your life for a reason, sometimes for a season, sometimes for a lifetime. I often wondered why our paths crossed that summer all those years ago. It seemed so fleeting." I met his gaze, my heart feeling strangely full. "Maybe," I said, equally softly, "some seasons just take a little longer to come back around." He smiled, a slow, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Maybe you're right." He reached for a small, velvet-wrapped object on the mantelpiece. "I wanted to give you something," he said, his voice a little hesitant, "to remember this visit, or maybe to remember that old summer too." He handed it to me. I carefully unwrapped the velvet, my fingers trembling slightly. Nestled in the cloth was a small, exquisitely carved wooden songbird, its head tilted as if listening, its tiny form so lifelike it seemed it might take flight from my palm. It was made from a light, fragrant wood, sanded so smooth it felt like silk. The detail was incredible. Each tiny feather, the delicate curve of its beak, the almost imperceptible lift of its wing. I looked up at him, my eyes suddenly misty. "James," I whispered, "it's beautiful. I don't know what to say." "It's a Carolina wren," he said, They mate for life, you know, and they sing all year round, even in winter. A little bit of resilience and hope. His words, simple and direct, went straight to my heart. This wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of him, a piece of this place, a symbol of something I was only just beginning to understand. It was a gesture of such profound kindness, such deep, unassuming affection, that it left me speechless. The experience of that evening, the simple meal, the warm fire, the easy conversation, and then this incredibly thoughtful gift, it all coalesced into something deeply emotional for me. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment, but a quiet accumulation of shared understanding, mutual respect, and a connection that felt both new and ancient. I felt a sense of peace, yes, but also a stirring of something more, a reawakening of senses, of emotions I thought had been laid to rest with Richard. It wasn't that I was forgetting him. Far from it. Richard would always be a part of me, the love of my middle years, the father of my child. But this connection with James, it felt different. It was like discovering a new room in the house of my heart, a room I hadn't known existed, filled with a gentle light and the scent of cedarwood. The next day was my last in Linville Creek. I woke with a sense of melancholy, the thought of leaving this rediscovered haven, and James weighing on me. But there was also a quiet joy, a sense of gratitude for these unexpected days. I spent the morning packing, the little wooden wren carefully wrapped and tucked into my bag. I took one last walk by the creek, the sound of the water a familiar comfort now. My sketchbook had a few new entries, tentative and a little rusty, but mine. Before heading out of town, I drove to the workshop. James was there, sanding a large burl of maple, his movements focused and precise. He looked up as I approached, a welcoming smile on his face, though I thought I detected a hint of sadness in his eyes, or perhaps I was just projecting my own feelings. "So," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth, "the traveler returns to her own lands." I tried to smile. Duty calls. Rose bushes to tame, grandchildren to spoil. "They're lucky to have you," he said, his gaze steady. We stood there for a moment, the silence filled with the things we weren't saying. There were no grand declarations, no promises of undying affection. It wasn't that kind of story, not for us. What we had found was something quieter, more subtle, but no less significant. It was a reaffirmation of connection, of the possibility of finding new meaning, new joy, even when you thought those chapters of your life were closed. "Thank you, James," I said, my voice a little thick, "for everything. For the bird. For reminding me." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The pleasure was all mine, Amanda. It was like finding a lost piece of a favorite melody. He walked me to my car. There was a slightly awkward moment, the kind that happens when a departure feels more significant than a simple goodbye. He didn't try to hug me, and I was grateful for that. It would have felt somehow too much or not enough. Instead, he simply took my hand, his own warm and calloused from his work, and held it for a moment. "Drive safe, Amanda," he said, "and don't be a stranger to Linville Creek, or to your sketchbook." I squeezed his hand. "I won't," I promised, and I knew I meant it. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching me go, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the forest and his workshop, a man who had, in the space of a few short days, carved a new and beautiful space in my memory and in my heart. The drive home was different from the drive up. The melancholy was there, yes, but it was a sweet melancholy, tinged with gratitude and a sense of quiet excitement. I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a skin I hadn't even realized I was wearing. The world looked a little brighter, the colors more vivid. When I got home, the house felt different too. It was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a peaceful space, a place for reflection, a place to nurture the small spark that had been rekindled within me. I unpacked the little wren and placed it on my bedside table, where I could see it every morning. A reminder of resilience, of hope, of songs sung even in winter. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself thinking of James often, of our conversations, of the quiet companionship we had shared. I didn't rush to call him, nor he me. There was no need. The connection we'd forged felt steady and sure, not something that needed constant reinforcement. I did pick up my sketchbook again, though, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. I started drawing the things around me, the way the light fell on the leaves in my garden, the expressive face of my sleeping cat, the intricate patterns on an old teacup. It wasn't about becoming a great artist, not anymore. It was about seeing, really seeing, and about reconnecting with that part of myself that had been dormant for so long. I even started a small correspondence with James. Not emails, but actual letters, written on paper, the kind that take time and thought. We wrote about our days, our work, the changing seasons. His letters were like him, thoughtful, unpretentious, with a dry wit that often made me smile. He sent me a pressed autumn leaf from Linville Creek once, its colors a fiery testament to the beauty he lived amongst. I sent him a packet of seeds from my particularly stubborn rose bush, telling him perhaps he, with his magic touch with wood, could coax some cooperation from them. This unexpected interlude, this journey back to a place and a person from my past, hadn't given me all the answers to life's big questions, but it had given me something just as valuable, a renewed sense of myself, a deeper appreciation for the quiet beauty of connection, and the understanding that personal growth doesn't have an age limit. It was a reminder that life can surprise you, that even in the autumn of one's years, new blossoms can appear, unexpected, and all the more precious for it. The attic crate was still there, but it no longer felt like a tomb of forgotten dreams. It felt more like a treasure chest, a reminder that every part of our story, every season, has its own unique beauty, its own quiet song. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find someone who helps you hear it again.